She had always lived in a world that was quiet, calm, and untouched by the rush of human life. Her home was far away from the noisy towns and crowded cities, nestled deep within a forest where the sunlight filtered through the leaves in golden patterns. Birds sang melodies that filled the air, and the soft rustle of the trees was her constant companion. She had grown up in this peaceful environment, where the only sounds were those of nature, and her days passed slowly, filled with curiosity and gentle exploration. To her, humans were distant figures, creatures she had seen only from afar. She had heard stories from travelers who occasionally passed by, tales of humans' strange ways and curious habits, but she had never interacted closely with them. Still, she did not fear them. In her heart, she believed that humans were harmless. They seemed complicated, yes, but not dangerous. From a very young age, she had been fascinated by humans. She would watch them carefully whenever she had the chance. Whether they were passing through the forest on journeys or resting near the river, she noticed everything. The way they moved, the way they spoke, the way they laughed, and even the expressions on their faces. She studied them like an artist. Studies a painting, trying to understand their intentions and emotions. There was something both strange and wonderful about them. Their presence filled her with curiosity, a desire to know more, and yet she kept her distance, content to observe quietly. She believed that this distance kept her safe while allowing her to learn from them. She spent hours imitating what she had seen. She would practice walking with the careful steps she had observed, trying to match their posture and movements. She mimicked their gestures and expressions in secret, imagining herself talking and laughing with them. Sometimes she would pretend to be one of them, exploring what it might feel like to belong to their world. These moments were her private joy, a bridge between her world and the humans' world. Her imagination allowed her to explore possibilities, and she often dreamed about the life she might lead if she ever could connect with humans more closely. Her home, surrounded by nature, was simple but full of life. She would climb trees to see further into the forest, run along the riverbank to watch the fish swim, and lie in the grass at night, staring at the stars that seemed so distant yet so familiar. Every day brought a new lesson about the world around her, and she learned to notice small details that others might overlook. The way sunlight reflected off the leaves, the patterns of birds flying across the sky, the subtle changes in the wind. These experiences shaped her understanding of life, patience, and observation. Humans were just another part of this vast, beautiful world, and she felt both respect and curiosity for them. Although she had always believed humans were harmless, there was also a small part of her that wondered about their unpredictability. Stories from the travelers sometimes spoke of humans causing harm, but these were rare accounts, distant and almost unbelievable to her. Most of what she saw in her quiet forest life convinced her that humans could be gentle, thoughtful, and even kind. She had never experienced cruelty firsthand, only observed gestures of care and cooperation, like humans helping each other carry heavy loads or guiding one another through difficult paths. In her mind, humans were creatures of choice. They could act wisely or foolishly, but deep down, she felt their intentions leaned toward goodness. Her fascination was not just about observing, they inspired her imagination. She would create little stories about the humans she saw. In her mind, she invented their conversations, their dreams, and even their problems. She imagined herself helping them or being part of their lives in some small way. Sometimes she would wonder what it would be like to understand their language, to hear their words directly instead of imagining them. The thought made her heart race with excitement. Even though she had never spoken to a human before, the idea of connecting with one filled her with hope and anticipation. Yet, she never allowed herself to act on these thoughts. The forest had always been her safe space, and the humans had always been outside it. There was comfort in maintaining this distance. She had routines, friends among the animals, and the quiet of nature as her constant companion. Life was simple, predictable, and peaceful. But deep down, she felt a growing curiosity that she could not ignore. It was like a gentle pull in her heart, a feeling that there was more to learn, more to experience, and that humans were the key to understanding that greater world. As days turned into months, her curiosity grew stronger. She began to notice small details about humans she had not seen before. The way their eyes reflected sunlight, the subtle expressions of concern or happiness on their faces, the way they seemed to communicate not just with words but with gestures and expressions that carried meaning. These observations fascinated her endlessly. She felt drawn to them in a way she could not explain. It was more than simple curiosity. It was a sense that humans held something important, something that her life had been missing. And so, she continued her quiet observations, never crossing the boundary into their world, but feeling ever closer to it in spirit. Her belief that humans were harmless was not challenged. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing day. She began to feel that she might one day meet one, not as a distant observer, but as a participant in their lives. The thought was thrilling, though tinged with nervousness. She had no idea what would happen if that day came, but she knew one thing for certain. Her world, once so complete in its quiet solitude, was about to change. Something inside her was awakening, a gentle, unspoken desire to reach out, to understand, and perhaps to connect. The forest remained her sanctuary, the humans her fascination, and her heart the bridge between the two. She had always believed humans were harmless, but she did not yet realize that the pull she felt toward them would soon become something far more profound, something that would challenge everything she thought she knew about herself and the world around her. For now, though, she was content to watch, to learn, and to dream, her imagination filling the space between curiosity and reality. And in that quiet, peaceful life, the first seeds of change were quietly taking root, waiting for the moment they would bloom. One bright morning, as the sunlight spilled gently across the forest floor, something unusual happened. She was walking along a familiar path near the river when she noticed movement ahead, something different from the usual birds or small animals. A human had entered her forest, completely unaware of her presence. He was tall and slightly disheveled, carrying a small backpack and moving carefully, as if he were both lost and curious at the same time. Her heart skipped a beat. This was the first time she had seen a human so close. Up until now, humans had been distant figures, far away enough to observe without worry. But now, one was here, near her, walking through the world she considered hers. At first, she froze behind a thick tree, her body tensing as she tried to understand what she was seeing. He looked harmless, certainly not dangerous, yet there was an unfamiliar thrill in having him so close. She studied him intently, noticing the way he looked around, how his fingers brushed against the leaves, how his eyes seemed both alert and gentle. Everything about him was so new, so alive and strangely beautiful. She had spent years imagining this moment, dreaming about what a close encounter with a human might feel like. But now that it was real, it was even more intense than she had imagined. She watched him carefully, trying not to make a sound. The human wandered slowly, examining rocks and plants, occasionally pausing to sketch something in a small notebook he carried. He hummed softly to himself, a sound that made her feel unexpectedly calm. There was a softness to him, a gentleness that seemed to radiate from his very being. She had seen humans act in different ways from afar, but up close, this one seemed entirely innocent, almost fragile, and yet he carried a quiet confidence. She felt a curious pull toward him, a strange sensation in her chest that she could not explain. It was unlike anything she had felt before. Days passed, and she continued to observe him, always from a safe distance. He seemed to be exploring the forest, taking notes, and occasionally pausing to study the animals or plants around him. She noticed that he had a habit of helping even the smallest creatures, gently moving a fallen bird back to its nest or guiding a tiny frog away from danger. His actions were small but filled with care, and each time she saw them, she felt a strange warmth spread through her. It was the same warmth she had imagined when thinking about humans, but now it felt real, tangible, and deeply affecting. Her curiosity grew stronger with every encounter, but so did another feeling she did not understand. A craving, an urge that seemed to pulse in her body every time she saw him. She tried to ignore it at first, convincing herself that it was just excitement or nervousness. But as days turned into a week, she realized that it was something more. Her body seemed to respond to his presence in ways she had never experienced before. Her heart raced, her breathing became shallow, and she felt a tingling sensation whenever he came near. She had always believed humans were harmless, and now that belief was being tested by her own instincts. It was as if her body knew something her mind did not yet understand, something about connection, closeness, and longing. She felt a pull she could not resist, a desire to move closer, to see him fully, and to be near him. One afternoon, the human stopped near a small clearing, setting down his notebook and sitting on a rock to rest. She found herself drawn to the spot, creeping quietly behind the trees, trying to be unseen. Yet the closer she got, the stronger the urge became. She wanted to hear his voice, to see his face clearly, to be acknowledged in some way. For the first time, she realized that her fascination with humans was no longer just intellectual. It was physical, emotional, and undeniable. Her body craved his presence, a feeling that both thrilled and terrified her. She had never imagined that such a sensation could exist, and yet here it was, undeniable and consuming. Despite her fear of being discovered, she took a small step forward, careful and cautious. The human did not notice her at first. He was absorbed in drawing a plant, his pencil moving quickly across the paper. She watched every movement, fascinated by his skill and focus. Then slowly, she dared to make a small sound, a twig snapping beneath her foot. The human looked up immediately, his eyes wide but calm. Instead of fear, his gaze held curiosity. He smiled gently as if welcoming her presence rather than being alarmed by it. That smile, simple and sincere, made her heart ache with a strange intensity. She wanted to move closer, to show herself fully, yet she hesitated, unsure of how to act. Over the next several days, she began to reveal herself gradually. She would appear briefly behind trees or rocks, allowing him to see glimpses of her, then retreat before he could approach fully. He never seemed frightened. Instead, he showed patience and understanding, as if he somehow knew she was cautious and respectful. Each encounter strengthened the strange connection she felt, making her cravings more intense but also more meaningful. She began to understand that her body's reactions were not something to fear. They were a signal of deep curiosity, attraction, and the desire for a bond that went beyond mere observation. The more time she spent near him, the more she realized that humans were not just harmless. They were capable of care, understanding, and gentle connection. Her long-held beliefs about humans being safe were validated, but now they carried a deeper meaning. She no longer saw him as a distant creature to observe. He was real, present, and accessible, and her body's yearning for closeness was proof of a connection that went beyond mere curiosity. She felt alive in a way she had never experienced before, as if the forest itself had shifted to make space for this new and intense relationship. By the end of the second week, she understood something. profound. Her initial fascination with humans had transformed into a powerful, instinctive desire. She wanted to know him fully, to share her world, and to experience the connection that her body and heart now craved. It was no longer enough to watch from afar. She had to step closer to engage and to bridge the gap that had existed for so long. And though fear lingered, it was now outweighed by excitement, anticipation, and the undeniable pull that had begun the moment he first entered her forest. She realized that her life, once predictable and safe, was changing. The quiet solitude she had cherished was no longer complete without him nearby. Her body's craving was a new reality she had to understand, explore, and accept. Humans, she now knew, were far more than harmless observers. They were a source of connection, wonder, and unexpected desire. And with this revelation, the stage was set for the first real encounter, one that would challenge everything she had believed and lead her into a world she had only dared to imagine. After days of careful observation and brief encounters, she found herself in a state of confusion she had never experienced before. Her body had begun to respond to the human in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. Every time she saw him, her heart raced, her hands trembled slightly, and a warmth spread through her chest that she could not control. She had always believed that humans were harmless, and now that belief was being tested by feelings she did not understand. For the first time, curiosity alone was not enough. Her instincts were pulling her toward him, demanding attention, and urging her to move closer. It was exhilarating and frightening all at once. She retreated into the forest to think. Sitting alone on a fallen tree, she tried to calm herself, trying to reason with the unfamiliar sensations she felt. She had always believed she could observe humans safely from a distance, but that distance no longer satisfied her. Her mind was filled with questions. Why did her body respond this way? Was it dangerous to feel such urges? Could she ever interact with him safely without losing control? The more she reflected, the stronger her cravings seemed to grow. It was as if her instincts had a life of their own, separate from her careful, rational mind. Every time she caught sight of him, she felt a pull that she could not ignore. She noticed how his smile lingered on her imagination even when he was far away, how his presence seemed to fill the space around her with warmth, and how the sound of his voice echoed in her mind long after he had left. She realized that her fascination had transformed into something deeper, a physical, emotional need to be near him, to connect with him in a way that went beyond simple observation. She had never experienced such a combination of fear, longing, and excitement before. It was a new, overwhelming feeling that left her both curious and anxious. Despite the intensity of her feelings, she tried to resist them. She reminded herself of the safety of her forest and the routines she had always followed. She told herself that getting too close could be dangerous, that humans were still unpredictable in ways she could not fully understand. But every time she saw him, every time he moved closer to her world, her resolve weakened. Her instincts were powerful, urging her to step forward, to interact, and to satisfy the yearning she felt deep in her chest. The struggle between mind and body created a tension that left her restless, unable to focus on anything else. She began to notice small changes in her behavior. She would wake earlier than usual, just to see him passing through the forest. She found herself lingering near paths she had once avoided, hoping for even a brief glimpse of him. Her thoughts often drifted to him when she was alone, imagining what it would feel like to touch his hand, hear his laughter up close, or share a simple moment together. These thoughts made her cheeks flush and her heart beat faster, yet they also filled her with a sense of guilt. She wondered if these feelings were wrong, if she had crossed an invisible line she did not yet understand. At the same time, she began to observe him more carefully than ever. She noticed how he paused to help animals, how he examined plants with careful attention, and how his eyes reflected a kind of gentle curiosity that seemed to match her own. The more she watched, the more she realized that her instincts were not purely physical, they were also emotional. She did not just crave his presence, she craved understanding, connection, and the chance to share her world with someone who could appreciate it fully. The realization both thrilled and scared her. It was no longer safe to hide behind her old habits of observation alone. Something inside her demanded action. One evening, as the sun began to set and the forest glowed with golden light, she found herself trembling at the thought of approaching him. Her instincts screamed at her to step forward, yet her mind warned of caution. She felt torn between the desire to connect and the fear of making a mistake. For hours she sat hidden behind a bush, watching him from afar. He seemed unaware of her presence, sketching in his notebook and occasionally looking around the forest with quiet admiration. The sight of him so calm and absorbed in his work filled her with longing. She wanted to move closer, to show herself, fully, to see if he would accept her presence without fear. Her inner conflict grew stronger each day. She realized that her feelings were not something she could ignore. Her body and mind were no longer in harmony. Her instincts were guiding her toward a connection that her rational mind could not yet understand. She began to question everything she had believed about herself, her world, and humans in general. Could it be possible that humans were not just harmless observers, but also capable of forming bonds that her instincts craved? The thought both excited and frightened her. It was an entirely new way of thinking, one that challenged the very foundation of her beliefs. Finally, after several restless nights, she decided that she could no longer remain a distant observer. Her instincts were too strong to ignore, and the longing she felt was too powerful to suppress. She resolved to approach him carefully, slowly, and with respect. She knew that the first step would be the most difficult, but it was also necessary if she wanted to understand her feelings and explore the possibility of connection. Her heart raced at the thought, yet she felt a sense of courage she had never known before. The time for hesitation was over. She began to plan her approach, thinking carefully about how to reveal herself without frightening him. She considered every possible scenario, imagining his reaction and preparing herself for patience, understanding, and empathy. Her mind worked tirelessly, balancing caution with the pull of her instincts. The craving she had felt for weeks had transformed into determination, a determination to bridge the gap between her world and his. She knew it would not be easy, but she also knew that the reward could be extraordinary, a bond that went beyond curiosity, observation, or imagination into the realm of true connection and understanding. And so, she waited for the right moment. Her inner conflict had reached a peak, a mixture of fear, longing, excitement, and hope. She understood that the first real step toward him would change everything. Her body's cravings, once confusing and overwhelming, were now a guide, showing her the path forward. She realized that her journey was no longer just about observation, it was about action, trust, and the courage to follow her instincts. The human she had watched for so long was no longer a distant figure. He had become a central part of her life, a presence she could no longer ignore. As night fell and the stars began to appear, she made a silent promise to herself. She would approach him with respect, patience, and care. She would allow her instincts and emotions to guide her, but she would remain mindful of his reactions, ready to adjust her actions to ensure safety and trust. Her inner conflict was far from over, but she had taken the first step toward resolving it. She was no longer a mere observer. She was an active participant in a story that was just beginning, one that would teach her about desire, connection, and the courage to face her own instincts. The day had finally come when she could no longer wait. Her heart beat faster than ever, a mixture of excitement and nervousness flooding through her body. She had spent countless days observing him, imagining conversations, and planning how she would reveal herself. Now, the pull of her instincts and the craving she had felt for weeks had grown too strong to ignore. She knew she had to take the first real step toward him, to move beyond watching and become part of his world, even if only for a moment. She approached carefully, moving through the forest with the quiet grace she had perfected over the years. Each step was deliberate, mindful of the soft rustle of leaves beneath her feet. Her breathing was steady, though her heart seemed to pound in her chest like a drum. She had no idea how he would react, whether he would be frightened, curious, or welcoming, but she trusted that her presence, honest and careful, would be understood. The forest seemed to hold its breath with her, as if it too sensed the significance of this moment. When she finally stepped into the clearing where he was resting, he looked up immediately, as if he had sensed her approach. Their eyes met, and she felt a jolt of recognition, a connection that went beyond words. His gaze was calm, patient, and kind, showing no fear, only curiosity and quiet acceptance. For the first time, she felt a sense of safety in his presence, a reassurance that her instincts had guided her correctly. Slowly, she moved closer, keeping her hands relaxed and her body open, signaling that she meant no harm. The human spoke softly, his voice carrying a warmth that immediately put her at ease. "Hello," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "I've noticed you around here. You don't need to be afraid." She tilted her head slightly, studying him. The tone of his voice was gentle and inviting, filled with patience and understanding. She felt her body respond, a wave of relief and connection washing over her. This was the interaction she had longed for. The first step toward bridging the gap between her world and his. For the next few hours, she stayed near him, speaking softly in the sounds and gestures she had learned to use. He listened carefully, responding with gestures, expressions, and simple words that slowly built a bridge of understanding between them. She realized that communication did not have to be perfect to be meaningful. Each glance, each smile, each subtle movement conveyed trust, curiosity, and mutual respect. Her body's cravings, once confusing and overwhelming, now felt like a natural response to the closeness and acceptance she was experiencing. As the day progressed, she discovered that humans were not just harmless. They were capable of deep understanding, empathy, and genuine care. The way he adjusted his posture to make her feel comfortable, the way he smiled gently when she hesitated, and the way he encouraged her to explore the clearing without fear, all of it made her feel valued and seen. For the first time, she realized that her instincts were not just physical urges. They were a guide to emotional connection and trust. The human had become more than an object of curiosity. He was a companion, a presence that filled her world with warmth and meaning. She began to move more freely around him, experimenting with gestures and small touches that conveyed her intentions. He responded in kind, mirroring her movements, showing that he understood her language of patience and care. Every interaction strengthened their bond, making her feel both exhilarated and safe. She laughed quietly at her own nervousness and amazement, marveling at how natural it felt to be near him. Her cravings, once a confusing storm inside her, were now a steady rhythm guiding her toward trust, connection, and understanding. As the sun began to set, painting the forest in shades of gold and orange, she realized how much she had learned in just one day. Her understanding of humans had transformed from distant observation to intimate knowledge. She saw that humans were not only capable of kindness, but they could also create bonds that fulfilled both emotional and instinctive needs. Her cravings had not led her into danger. They had led her to discovery, connection, and a profound sense of belonging. For the first time, she felt that humans were more than just harmless. They were companions capable of forming meaningful relationships. Over the next several days, she and the human spent more time together. They explored the forest side by side, sharing observations and discoveries. She showed him hidden places, quiet streams, and nests of birds he had not noticed. He listened carefully, asking questions and marveling at her knowledge. Their communication grew richer with each passing day, combining gestures, expressions, and simple words to build a deeper understanding. She began to see humans as complex, gentle, and fascinating beings, capable of patience, empathy, and emotional depth she had never imagined. Her cravings, once an overwhelming force she struggled to understand, now became a natural part of her connection with him. They were not just physical urges. They were a reflection of the emotional bond forming between them. Every glance, every shared laugh, every moment of understanding deepened her desire to be near him, not out of need alone, but out of appreciation, trust, and genuine companionship. She had learned that instincts and emotions could work together, guiding her toward meaningful relationships rather than leading her astray. By the end of the week, she felt a profound sense of balance. Her initial fear and hesitation had transformed into trust and confidence. Her instincts, once confusing and overwhelming, now guided her with clarity and purpose. She had discovered that humans could be gentle, understanding, and caring, and that her own instincts were not something to fear, but a powerful tool for connection. She realized that her life, once quiet and solitary, had expanded in ways she had never imagined. Her forest, once a place of observation, had become a shared world, a space where curiosity, trust, and connection flourished together. And so, she embraced the new reality of her life. She had learned to balance her instincts with understanding, to approach the human with patience and care, and to allow her cravings to guide her toward meaningful connection. Her belief that humans were harmless had evolved into a deeper understanding. Humans were not only safe, but they were also capable of forming bonds that fulfilled both heart and body. She had taken the first real step toward friendship, trust, and companionship, and she knew that this was only the beginning of a journey that would continue to teach her about connection, empathy, and the beauty of understanding another being fully. Time passed, and with it came a profound change in her life. The once distant human, whom she had watched from afar with curiosity, had become a constant presence she could no longer imagine being without. Her body's cravings, which had once confused and frightened her, had transformed into a source of guidance and clarity. They were no longer overwhelming urges, but signals of connection, trust, and companionship. She had learned to understand herself, her instincts, and the ways in which humans could offer care, respect, and emotional closeness. Her forest, once a sanctuary of solitude, had become a place where two lives intertwined, a space shared and celebrated. She reflected on how much she had grown. Initially, she had observed humans from a distance, believing them to be harmless, yet still unfamiliar. She had imagined conversations and interactions that seemed impossible, even dangerous. But through patience, courage, and careful steps, she had learned that humans could be gentle, understanding, and capable of forming bonds that nurtured both heart and instinct. Her cravings had not led her astray. They had led her to discovery, to trust, and to a meaningful connection. Every instinct, every feeling of longing had been a guide pointing her toward something beautiful. Each day with him brought new lessons. She discovered the depth of human emotions, their ability to listen, to understand, and to offer kindness without expecting anything in return. The simplest gestures, smiles, careful movements, soft words, taught her more about trust and care than she had ever imagined possible. Her body and mind worked together now, each reinforcing the other, creating a harmony she had never known. She had learned that instincts were not just about desire. They were about recognizing connection, valuing presence, and understanding the importance of patience. Together, they explored the forest in ways she had never experienced alone. She showed him secret paths, quiet streams, and hidden clearings where sunlight danced on the water. He listened carefully, admired her knowledge, and often expressed awe at the beauty she had always known. She realized that sharing her world with him enriched it, giving it new meaning. The forest was no longer only her sanctuary, it had become a shared world filled with laughter, discovery, and mutual respect. Her instincts had guided her here, but it was their trust, patience, and understanding that made the connection real. Over time, their bond deepened. They spent long hours talking, learning from each other, and discovering similarities and differences in their worlds. She began to understand the complexity of human thoughts and emotions, while he learned to respect her unique perspective, her cautious approach, and her deep connection to the forest. Every encounter strengthened the bond they shared, making her feel both exhilarated and secure. The cravings she had once struggled with were now integrated into her experience, no longer a source of fear, but a reflection of the closeness and intimacy that had grown between them. She also learned patience. Humans were not always fast to understand her ways, just as she had been slow to understand theirs, but that patience became part of their connection, a shared rhythm that guided their interactions. She realized that trust was built slowly, step by step, and that her instincts were a compass that pointed her in the right direction without forcing her to act recklessly. This understanding gave her confidence, a certainty that her connection with him was safe, meaningful, and capable of lasting. As weeks turned into months, she embraced a new sense of freedom and fulfillment. No longer was she the distant observer, standing apart and imagining possibilities. She was an active participant in a life that was richer, more vibrant, and filled with connection. Her cravings had taught her to recognize desire, not just as an instinct, but as a reflection of emotional need, curiosity, and care. They had guided her to trust, to empathy, and to a relationship that nurtured both her heart and her understanding of the human world. One evening, as the sun set in soft hues of pink and gold, she and the humans sat by the riverbank, watching the water flow. She reflected on how far she had come, from observing humans with cautious curiosity to sharing her life with one in deep trust and companionship. Her instincts, once confusing and frightening, had led her to growth, understanding, and profound connection. She realized that humans were not just harmless observers, as she had once believed. They were capable of love, patience, empathy, and companionship in ways that could transform a life completely. Her life had changed, not because the world around her had altered, but because she had allowed herself to follow her instincts and embrace connection. She had taken risks, faced her fears, and allowed herself to trust someone who had once been a distant figure in her imagination. That trust had been rewarded with understanding, companionship, and a profound sense of belonging. Her body's cravings, once a source of uncertainty, had become a guide toward fulfillment, a way of recognizing what was meaningful, important, and real. She also understood that connection required effort, care, and attention. It was not enough to feel instinctively drawn to someone. True bonds were built through understanding, patience, and respect. She had learned to communicate, to observe, and to respond with empathy. Every small gesture, the tilt of a head, the gentle smile, the shared laugh, was a step toward deepening the bond they now shared. She realized that humans, when approached with patience and openness, could form relationships that nourished both heart and instinct, creating a balance that was both rare and beautiful. By the end of her journey, she had fully embraced her connection with him. The forest, once a place of solitary observation, had become a shared space of discovery and trust. Her instincts, once confusing and overwhelming, had become a guiding force for understanding and emotional fulfillment. Humans, she realized, were far more than harmless. They were capable of care, empathy, and connection that could change a life profoundly. She had learned to trust her body, her mind, and her heart, discovering that the greatest lessons often came from the courage to follow one's instincts while remaining mindful, patient, and respectful. Her story, once a tale of distant observation and cautious curiosity, had become a story of trust, discovery, and emotional growth. She had ventured into the unknown, faced her own fears, and allowed herself to connect with a human in a way that was meaningful, safe, and deeply fulfilling. In the end, she understood that her instincts, cravings, and curiosity had been guides, not threats, leading her to a life enriched by trust, companionship, and understanding. Her heart and body, once uncertain, were now in harmony, and her life had expanded in ways she had never imagined possible. She had thought humans were harmless, and in discovering the truth, she had discovered herself, her instincts, and the profound beauty of connection. Her journey was complete, yet it was also just the beginning of a life shared with someone she could trust, care for, and grow alongside. The once quiet forest now echoed with laughter, conversation, and the warmth of companionship, a testament to the courage it took to follow one's instincts and embrace the unknown.